Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. This is going to be a video that's a little different than usual because it's not about movies or the entertainment industry. That's what I usually like to talk about here on the show, and I think I have a lot of that to talk about. That sounds like there might be some positive stuff coming out about the writer's strike, and I've got some movie reviews that are coming out later this week. But today I'm actually doing something that is a little more personal, and it's kind of outside my wheelhouse, honestly. It's outside of my comfort zone because that's not what I usually do here on this channel. I don't do drama videos. I don't do stuff that's focused on me or even focused on stuff outside of movies and TV and streaming. But I felt like I needed to talk about this for a lot of different reasons, and mainly because I want to put a spotlight on what's been happening and something that's happened not only to my show here on this channel, but has been happening to YouTubers and podcasters, big and small, including a lot of people whose names you probably recognize that operate inside of this movie and entertainment space. So if you will indulge me, this video is going to be about me and my relationship with a company called Kast Media and how they took over $10,000 directly from me. So there was some reporting that was done on this in July about people being unhappy with Kast owing them money. One podcaster named Jim Cornette spoke out about them before really anybody else about missing payments and broken promises. But it really all blew up about 2 weeks ago when Theo Von went public with the hundreds of thousands of missing money from his relationship with Kast Media.
Our podcast was defrauded. We were stolen from. We were taken advantage of. A lot of ways to say it. The company that did it is Kast Media, and the man that did it is Colin Thompson. Just between talking with folks, there's up to $4 million that I know of that people were taking advantage of. We're in the six figures. I know of podcasts that are in the seven figures.
Then last week, the YouTuber CoffeeZilla, who does investigative reporting online, posted a really good kind of primer video on the whole thing, including a interview with the CEO, Colin Thompson. If you really kind of want to get the shape of this entire thing, I highly recommend that video because I certainly learned a lot about not just the sort of corporate malfeasance, but, you know, perhaps allegedly, potentially some personal malfeasance going on with this whole situation.
The central claim of Colin is that all of this happened because revenues dropped in 2022 and he just couldn't pay people on time. But as I spoke to people about Colin, I realized late payments weren't a new thing at all.
When I started this channel back in 2020, it was actually never my intention to take any kind of advertising deal where I would read the ads. It was always intended that this would be a YouTube channel that was monetized by YouTube, by Google. But when I started this show that's on my shirt, actually, All My Movies, later on in 2020, I was introduced to what you hear on a lot of podcasts, which is a hosted read. Basically, an ad is purchased, they send copy for the host, which has, you know, the different stuff that they want the host to say. You add in your personal experience. And then moving on from All My Movies, a lot of the companies started to embrace the idea of the simulcast, the idea that you have audio as well as video on YouTube and other platforms. So you probably noticed that starting really in 2021, almost every week I have one or two ads or sponsors that are personal endorsements, hosted reads by me. In January of this year, 2023, I started working with a company called Kast Media. I had previously been with another company that was booking spots for me, booking advertisements. And it's important to note that I had several long-term deals that were left over from that original company before I moved over to Kast. It's also important to know that I have a personal sort of ad rep who works with the companies sort of on my behalf. I don't deal with them directly. He works with them. They send me the spots. And usually when I get paid, or before my relationship with Kast started, when I would get paid through him, my personal representative. So the ad companies would pay him, he would take out his share, and then he would pay me. Well, because I still had some of these leftover advertising deals from the previous company, those payments never stopped. And I didn't realize that I was supposed to be getting paid directly from Kast in addition to the payments I was getting from my old ad deals, which is sort of how the situation went unchecked on my watch for so long. So in short, I thought that all of the money from the hosted ad reads that I was doing should be coming from one source, when in fact it should have been coming from two sources, my personal rep and Kast Media. And I will say openly that part of the reason why this wasn't caught by me until last week really is because I wasn't keeping as close of an eye on my finances as I should be. I should have confirmed where my money should be coming from. I should have confirmed which spots have been paid out. It's tough sometimes because some spots pay out 30 days after you do them, some spots pay out 90 days after you do them, and it can be a little convoluted to track all of that, and I slacked on that, and I'll own that. I don't own anything as far as Kast not paying me, but I certainly do own my part in not being vigilant in making sure that I was getting paid what I should. So in all, while I was at Kast for the first half of this year, I booked 19 spots that I read on air. And when I take a spot like that, a 60 to 90 second spot, usually I put them either in the middle of the show if it's a long show or at the end of the show. What I'll also do is cut down on the number of ad breaks I put in through YouTube, because I don't want my show to be full of so many ads. And if I'm getting paid to read an ad, that to me says, well, then I can afford to maybe skip a mid-roll ad that I might put in the video. So when we're talking about not getting paid for one of these hosted reads, not only am I missing the income that would come from that spot, it's also a decrease on my YouTube ad revenue because I'm cutting down on the number of YouTube ads I'm putting in videos that have a hosted read. Now, there's no way for me to get that money back, and there's no way for me to even calculate how much I lost. But again, it just sort of underscores how important it is to get paid for these hosted ad reads. In June, my personal rep contacted me about switching companies again, even though we had just started working with Kast in January. And he said one of the reasons why was that Kast was having financial troubles and that they were going to be acquired by this other company called Podcast One, and we'd have to change the terms of our agreement. I don't know why, and this is a separate issue that I am pursuing on my own. I was not told at that time that Kast had not been paying its creators, because when you go back, there were people that had been complaining about this for months. There was some coverage about it back in July, and it seems like a lot of people knew that they weren't getting those Kast payments as early as last February or March, and yet I wasn't told that anything was late. I was told back in June that I basically had a choice between staying with Kast or going to a different company. It was actually the original ad company that we switched from back in January, and that if I stayed with Kast, that I would have to give up all of the ads that this other company had sold, which were my long-term ad deals, the products like AG1 that you see on this channel all the time. And I didn't want to do that, obviously. I don't want to give up ads that I have sold through the end of the year. And even though Kast had already sold several ads for me through the rest of 2023, I said, well, I'd rather keep those long-term deals, so let's leave Kast. Luckily, this new company rebooked most of the ads that Kast had already bought against my show. And honestly, if I hadn't moved, if I had not left Kast, then I likely would have been out a much larger chunk of my ad revenue for the year when it comes to hosted reads, which is a significant chunk of my overall revenue. So while this loss hurts, it could have been a lot worse if I had decided not to leave Kast. Now, in this reporting that's happened in the last few weeks, a lot of folks have said that when they confronted Kast and then later Podcast One about getting all of the money that they were owed, that they were offered a deal, which is basically to be paid a fraction of what was owed to them at that time and to be paid the rest in stock in this new company, Podcast One. That stock, by the way, has tanked ever since it went public a couple of weeks ago, largely because these allegations came to light right as the company went public. I want to make it clear that I never was offered that deal, because then again, I would have known that I hadn't been paid. All I knew was that I had a choice between Kast and this other company, and I chose to not stay with Kast. And really, I thought that that was the end of my story with that company, that we worked together for a few months, and then I moved on to another place. At least I thought that story was over until last week when I was visiting Los Angeles with my partner, Mara. We're getting married in a few weeks, and we were literally at our engagement party. It was a gathering of friends to celebrate the wedding that was coming up, and a good friend of mine, you might know his name, Christian Harloff. We worked together for many years. We did stuff at Screen Junkies, big in the movie trivia schmodown, asked me what I thought about all the drama that was going on with Kast and the money that was gone, and it was just blowing up. There were, YouTube videos and podcast stuff coming out about it. He's like, well, what do you think about all the drama? And I'm like, literally, it was like blank face. I was like, what drama? And he was like, Kast and like all the money that they owe everybody. And I told him, I said, Christian, I have literally no idea what you're talking about. He's like, well, they owe you money, right? And I said, I don't think so. I mean, I've been getting paid. And he's like, you know what? You might want to go home and check your records because everybody I know that worked with Kast is owed a lot of money, and now it's kind of blown up into this big thing. By the way, Christian is one of those people. His channel was affected just like mine with this whole deal. One of the stories about this whole situation that came out in the last couple of weeks was from The Verge. And in the story, it talks about the company that I work with, and the name of my show is in the news story about everybody losing money from Kast. And at that time, at the time that my name was out there, I still didn't know what was going on. And like I said, if I had been doing what I should have, if I had been keeping an eye on my finances as closely as I should have, if I would have realized where all my money should have been coming from, I don't think it would have changed the outcome, but I would feel a little less had, in the sense that I could have perhaps confronted Kast earlier in the process or alerted somebody or at least said, hey, I'm not going to read any more of your ads until you pay me. But I didn't know that I wasn't getting paid. And I know that sounds ignorant, but you know what? I was. I thought I knew where the money was coming from. And that's a lesson on me. That's 100% on me, not knowing where the money's coming from. And it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's a lesson that I have learned. This was an absolute wake-up call for me. And it's a reminder that no matter what industry you're in, but particularly if you're doing a job like this, where you have revenue streams that are coming from a lot of different places, YouTube, Patreon, if you're doing hosted reads, if you're getting stuff like brand deals, you can't just take for granted that everybody is paying you and paying you on time and paying you what you should be paid. I tend to be kind of naive in that way. I trust people. I trust the people that I work with. I trust the companies that I work with. And this is yet another reminder for me that I guess I should probably maybe not trust them as much. I hate that that's where we are, but that's just kind of what this situation has taught me. So I went through my emails and I found the financial statements that Kast had sent me every month. And it's one of those things that's like, yeah, in retrospect, this does look pretty sus because it was literally just a Google sheet that was updated every month. And it would give me the gross amount of money that they owed me and the net amount of money that they owed me. And I have financial statements through May. I don't have one for June, which would be a couple of other spots that I was supposed to be paid for. But according to the information that I have, from January of this year through May, the company sent me statements saying that I was owed a net amount of $17,589. Out of that $17,589 that was owed to me, according to my own amateur forensic accounting, I found just one payment from Kast back in April for $1,795.20. Which means that, for lack of a better word, Kast stole $15,793.80 from me. And if anybody who's associated with Kast or affiliated with them has an issue with me using the word stole in regard to my money, well, I will say that it is money that is owed to me, and it is money that Kast has in their possession, or somebody has in their possession, that they don't have permission to have. I consider that stolen property. If they want to give it to me, then I will happily publicly say that Kast didn't steal my money, or that someone associated with Kast didn't steal my money. But as long as I don't have it, guess what? It's stolen. A lot of the big headline makers with this whole scandal have been talking about how Kast owes them, $400,000 or even $150,000 or millions of dollars. And obviously, I'm not in that category. This is really small potatoes when you compare it to some of the big amounts that are owed to some podcasters. But keep in mind that this channel and my podcast channel and everything else operates on a much smaller scale. $16,000, and I'm lucky enough to be able to say this, isn't financially ruinous for me, but it really isn't great either. I mean, I have a wedding coming up this year. I have a honeymoon coming up this year. These are two once-in-a-lifetime expenses that I have budgeted, and that I budgeted according to the amount of money that I was supposed to be paid this year. And yeah, I should have done a better job of tracking it, but that doesn't excuse the fact that this was money that is owed to me, that is being withheld, that somebody took. It's not that Kast didn't get paid from the brands that hired them to sell ads. The brands paid them. I did the ads, and yet the money is just gone. And it's really kind of galling to me because I actually put a lot of care into the ads and the ad reads that I do here on the show. I turn down as many sponsors as I take because anything that I endorse or I do a read for, I want it to be something that I would actually use, that I don't feel bad about saying my audience should use. I had a deal with BetterHelp that I canceled earlier this year. That cost me thousands of dollars on its own because there were some disclosures that came out about how they use their information, and I didn't feel comfortable plugging them on the channel anymore. And I actually dealt with my reps at Kast and said, cancel those spots. I can't in good conscience continue to plug this sponsor. And that's really the philosophy I have with all of the different hosted reads that I have. I'm not in here to just make the maximum amount of money possible. I do want to kind of try to maintain a shred of integrity. I try to conduct myself with integrity. And so when I see that met with absolute unprofessionalism, it's really upsetting and it's really frustrating, not just for me, but for everybody else that this happened to. And I want to make it clear that there are two things that I am not asking you for with this video. Number one, I'm not asking for your sympathy. If you want to give it to me, that's great, but this is not a woe is me type of video. This really is a video just to kind of expose something that's been going on inside of this industry. And the other thing that I'm not asking you for is money, because this is a business situation that has nothing to do with any of you that are watching the channel. The fact that you are watching the channel is what allows me to make a living doing this. The size of my audience is what Kast used to sell these different spots. And so I'm not going to ask you to make up for some sort of a business decision that somebody else made. No, I'm really doing this video for three reasons. The first reason is to add to the public chorus and the discourse about this situation, because I think the more people that know about it, the more likely it is that maybe something can be done about it. If there's a chorus of voices, if it gets picked up in more mainstream publications, then maybe somebody somewhere will be able to leverage it against Kast, which has now been acquired by Podcast One, or against Colin Thompson, the former CEO or current CEO or whatever of Kast. If enough people know about it, then maybe something can be done. The second reason I'm doing this is because I feel stupid. I feel like an absolute idiot that this happened and that I allowed it to happen under my nose, and largely because I have sat and watched this happen to other people, to friends of mine in this business. I worked for a company. I had a front row seat to the absolute destruction of Defy Media. They went out of business overnight, catastrophically out of business. And as they were going out of business, they did the exact same thing to friends of mine in the YouTube space by withholding their ad revenue and not paying them money that they were due, that Kast did to me and so many others. And at the time I was like, oh my God, that's awful. And I didn't think that they were stupid, but I thought how terrible it was that a company they trusted did something like that to them. I thought I was smart enough to avoid something like that. And yet here I am, and the same exact thing happened to me. It was Kast Media that picked my pocket, but I didn't really make it that hard for them to do it. And I think that it's important to remind people not to put themselves in that situation, because don't get me wrong, I am 10% as pissed at myself as I am pissed off at Kast Media, but I am still pissed off at myself for not doing more to prevent this or call attention to it. And this kind of brings me to the third reason I'm doing this video, which is that this isn't the first time this has happened, or the 5th time, or the 10th time. Even in the new media space, there have been so many Kasts and Defy Medias and other companies out there that sign talent and collect podcasters and YouTubers like they were Pokemon, and then promise them everything. And when things don't go their way, they just leave them in the lurch, and they owe them tens of thousands of dollars, and they just disappear. Or they offer you some BS stock option, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, in exchange for the cash that they actually owe you. I actually, way back in June when I decided to move channels, and before I knew just how bad this was, I sent a text to my personal ad rep about this when he said that Kast wasn't able to make a whole lot of money, or they were having financial troubles. And this is what I said in the text verbatim, quote, "I hate these new media companies, man. Every single one of them acts like they're the next big thing, and about 10% ever figure out how to actually make money." And that's what companies like Kast are doing. They're using podcasters and YouTubers and influencers as essentially human capital. They're collecting them and promising them all this money and selling a company based off of their hard work and based off of the audiences that they build and hoping that the network succeeds or the channel succeeds. But when it doesn't, after they've likely already enriched themselves and drawn huge salaries as the CEOs of these companies that they say it's going to be $1 billion company, it's going to be a $500 million company. When things go bad, they take the money, they cut and run, and they leave the people who they leveraged to build that company out in the cold. And so out of this terrible situation, maybe, just maybe, if somebody is getting ready to sign with a company like this and they remember this video or they remember Theo Vaughn's video or they remember CoffeeZilla or anybody else that's spoken out about this or anybody else that's spoken out about a situation like this in the past, if that keeps somebody from signing a deal like that or working with a company that's going to do that, then maybe you can salvage something out of this. Because keep in mind, you can think that you're media savvy. You can think that you know this business. I've been in the digital space since 2012. Like I said, I've watched this happen to people before. I thought I was safe. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought that I was being careful. I thought that I knew a good company from a bad company, and I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And so the more that people who have had this happen to them speak out, the more likely it is, I think, that the next people in line might give those companies a closer look, or maybe will keep a closer eye on their finances, like I should have done. You can't just let these things happen. You have to try to make sure that there are consequences to that happening. So what's next? Honestly, I don't know. I know that, or at least I think I know, that Kast has not filed for bankruptcy, which might allow for some sort of a liquidation to repay people that they owe. I do know, however, that Kast was acquired by a company called Podcast One, which is a division of a company called Live One. Podcast One went public with their stock just as this news was breaking. I know, it was perfect timing. And the day that Podcast One's stock went public, the CEO, the head of the company, Robert Ellen, went on Yahoo Finance and did an interview where he mentioned their acquisition of Kast and the fact that they owed people money, but not in the context that I think a lot of people would have preferred.
So we've bought a distressed asset called Kast Media, very distressed, troubled asset, was owed a lot of money to its podcasters and couldn't really afford to pay them, and the banks pulled out and debt holders pulled out. So we acquired those and have added some very serious revenues to it. So this morning we announced, as part of the uplisting, we increased our guidance from 34 million last year to this year being 47 to 53 million. And for the first time, I have a very serious IBITA for $4 to $5 million of IBITA. So dramatic turn for the company. And I fully expect to use that currency going forward for additional acquisitions.
So in case you're not aware, that word that he used toward the end there, IBITA, it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And basically what Ellen is doing in that interview is referring to the acquisition of Kast as a troubled asset in the context of, well, you know, they had all these creators and they were troubled because they couldn't pay those creators. So we essentially got them for cheap. And now we own their creators and the people that made stuff for them. And that helps us, the company, become more valuable. And our earnings before interest, whatever, our IBITA is going to go up, which means that our investors will make more money, which means that our stock price will hopefully go up. Nothing about the creators of the company that they acquired who are owed money. And it kind of goes back to that deal that was offered, as I mentioned, to people who did confront Kast earlier about the money that they were owed, because apparently many of them were offered a deal from Podcast One.
We'll acquire you, pay off what you're owed, if you sign a new deal with new terms with us. If you do, you'll get back some of the money you're owed now, some of the money you're owed over 2 years, and you'll also get stock in our company.
Taking stock instead of cash is something that people should do, like if they're working at a startup. Like if you're, one of the founders of Google or Apple or Facebook or whatever, and you're like, well, I'm going to invest in the future of this company. I choose to invest in the future of this company because I'm going to help to guide it and be a great company. when a company like this offers you stock instead of cash, and this is something that happened to people at Defy Media when they say, well, we're not going to pay you in cash. We're going to pay you in our company stock, which isn't public yet, but is going to be worth a lot of money. If you don't have control over how that stock price does, which means if you're not the CEO of that corporation, don't take that deal. There is no guarantee that that stock is ever going to go public. If the stock does go public, there is no guarantee that that stock is ever going to increase in value. And even if you have the stock and it goes public and it increases in value, you may be forced to hold on to it until it vests, at which point you can't even sell it at the peak of its value. The company might go bankrupt, and then once again, you're left with worthless stock. This is a sucker's deal. And a lot of people apparently walked away from Kast, walked away from Podcast One, and potentially walked away from the money they were owed because they understood that. They said, I'm not staying with this company based on this deal because it seems like you're still trying not to pay me.
It felt like to me, they're trying to leverage our podcast and other podcasts to then make their stock do well. And then if that happens, then we'll get a share of our money, right? Like it just, the whole thing to me felt really seedy.
And in my opinion, it's just another version of what Kast was doing to its podcasters, which is saying, hey, stay with the company. We're going to be the next big thing. We've cracked this business model. This sounds like the exact same argument from the people who just took on the distressed asset of Kast. I mean, listen to this interview.
Where the podcast industry is, I mean, it feels like there's a bit of a shakedown that's happening. You know, there were some big names that were acquired, especially for Spotify. We were talking about Meghan Markle's podcast, for example, earlier today, that haven't necessarily performed well. Are we at a saturation point? How would you characterize the state of the industry right now?
And to interject here, that's actually a very valid question. It looks like the podcast market peaked around the height of the pandemic, and that we are seeing a dip in interest. People are listening to fewer podcasts. The market is oversaturated. And so, as the head of a company that now is exclusively marketing in podcasts, how can you sustain the growth of the company? How can you assure that the company will remain healthy in a market that seems to be stagnating? And, well, here was the answer.
How would you characterize the state of the industry right now?
The beginning of the beginning. We're really in the first, maybe second inning of podcasting. It's grown since COVID from 400 million to 1.3 billion. But you know, from all the numbers are indicating globally, it'll be a $7 to $10 billion industry by 2030.
I am telling you because I've heard the same terminology in so many meetings at Defy Media before they went out of business. This is New Media 101 for trying to convince people that you have unlocked the secret to success. Because first you say that you are at the tip of the spear of an untapped market. The number of people in the audience is nearly unlimited. Defy Media said that when they were talking about the YouTube space, and now we hear it about the podcast space. Then you talk about the great promise that the company has. It has unprecedented reach into so many different platforms. Again, I've heard this before from a company that had no idea how to actually monetize the market.
And giving them a full 360 play, everything from marketing to production to sales across the board. And then we have this massive distribution network that crosses over Apple and Spotify and iHeart and Samsung TVs and OTT channels. And I think we're just going to continue to expand that network. And I think the ability to be agnostic and be across all the platforms is going to be critical.
And then you end it by throwing around terms like OTT and platform agnostic that make you sound very techie and very smart. Again, I have heard those terms in meeting after meeting after meeting. They mean nothing. They are technical market terms. They do not prove that you actually know anything about that market. Every single company, almost without fail, that is like this, whose sole business strategy is the acquisition of a large number of creators and podcasters and channels, etc., will always have a business plan that is focused on unlimited growth. And I can tell you, I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but I am saying that most of these companies have no way to guarantee that it actually will happen. And the more confident these companies are that they have figured out the way to tap the market potential in a way that nobody else has before, the more skeptical I am of that company and whether they can actually do it. I wish that I knew more about Kast before I signed with them. I wish that I had heard their CEO, Colin Thompson, talk, because he talked in this exact same corporate speak. I wish that I had done my due diligence, because if I had, I probably would have said, I don't trust these guys. And I would have paid closer attention to who was paying me and when I was getting paid and what I was getting paid and what spots were due. But I didn't do that. And I so wish that I had. And I so wish for anyone else out there that they don't have to go through this same thing. So there's one last statement that I want to highlight from Rob Ellen in that Yahoo Finance interview, and it was regarding Podcast One's philosophy, especially when it comes to its creators.
People they'd acquired all these assets. They have to figure out how to run them. It's really complicated just to acquire them and not know how to deal with creators. What I think we're best at is we're a creator-first platform, building really serious relationship with those creators and giving them a full 360 play.
If Podcast One really wants to prove that they're creator first as a company, then I don't know, I have a humble suggestion. Pay us. Pay the creators who helped to lay the groundwork at Kast, the ones that this distressed asset was built upon, the ones who helped to create the company that you refer to as a big booster to your IBITA that maybe will help to boost your stock price. You know, all of that, all of those creators, almost all of them, I will guarantee you, are owed some kind of money, not stock options, not money paid in 3 years, money now, money that is due to those creators right now. You knew that Kast was a distressed asset. Well, guess what? Meet the distressed. The people who are owed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars by the company that you acquired. Kast didn't pay us. Why don't you, Podcast One? If Podcast One is not willing to do that, then as far as I'm concerned, they are just another shady new media company that is building the future on limitless growth built off of the backs of expansion upon expansion upon expansion. And if you are signing a deal with Podcast One, or you're signing a deal with any company that's based in this space, then I implore you, check the terms of that deal. Make sure that they are accountable for those payments. Make sure you know when the payments are coming in. And most importantly, if those payments aren't coming in, the payments that you should be tracking, the payments that I was not accurately tracking, don't work for them until you get that money. This has been a running theme this entire summer. We've been talking about the SAG-AFTRA strike and the WGA strikes. It's all built on the exploitation of labor. It's all built on the idea that I'm going to build my company based on the hard work of somebody else, but when the time comes to pay up, I'm not going to do it. Don't let this happen to you. Know what you're signing, know what the terms are, know what you're worth, and if you're not getting paid what you're worth, don't do the work. So I don't really know what the end of the Kast saga is going to be, and it's still ongoing, but in the meantime, I'm going to be doing my best to just kind of keep going, but I do have a little bit of revenue to make up, so if you see maybe a few extra videos, or there's an extra ad here or there, or maybe I'm plugging Cameo, which you can find in the description below, just a little bit harder, I would only ask that you have a little bit of patience because, you know, it's kind of a big year and I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm setting myself up to be financially stable and financially successful in the future. I'm lucky that the damage wasn't worse than it is, but it's still not fun, you know? But really, like so many independent creators before me, what this really boils down to is a lesson in trust and diligence and being self-reliant and making sure that I'm keeping track of what I need to keep track of. And I've certainly learned a lot from this situation, and my hope would be that companies like Kast would maybe learn a lot too, but, you know, I'm not holding my breath on that one. Thanks so much for listening to this long, convoluted story about a new media financial scandal. I promise I will be going back to talking about fun stuff like, you know, strikes and labor stoppages, but also box office and movies and what this channel is built on. But really, I do also have to say that one of the reasons that I'm able to sustain a hit like this is that so many of you do watch these videos and also support on Patreon or, you know, watch Charts with Dan and let the ads run or whatever it is. Thank you so much for doing that. I am, at the end of the day, very lucky to be able to make a living here. There are going to be bumps in the road. You take your lumps, you learn from it, and you move on. Thank you so much. I'll be back here very soon with more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then.